So let me finish by giving an example of this labeling thing I'm talking about. Because what I'm concerned about is I don't want our concern about generalizing to stop us from being able to be good social scientists who are about the practice of social scientific classification. Here's an example drawn right out of the news. The Kardashians. You may have heard of them. I live in LA. I can't help but hear of them all the time. Well, if you follow the news or TMZ or to go to any of these websites, you'll see lots of ways that people kind of label or try to generalize their behavior, or what they're about. They might talk of them as empowered women, or some people might call them media seekers, or more people might really question what it is they do with their lives and their bodies, all in the pursuit of attention and profit. But a social science explanation, we wouldn't not classify, but we'd do it in a very different way. We might say, for example, well, what's not important about these Kardashians is the elements of their individuality, but the fact that there's an entertainment industry that's looking to package certain products and latch other products, perfumes, clothings, lifestyles, cars, Reeboks, running shoes. And so they look for packages, the Kardashians, to put those other packages on top of and sell things, right? We're in a society where we industry is profit driven. And we're also in a society where networks of influence and power matter. So we could use the Kardashians to trace how biographical ties through generations get you to be successful. Don't forget the lineage they come from. Bruce Jenner being, I believe, part of that lineage. I don't know it all quite well, but you could trace back and see, it's not such a coincidence that they're quote-unquote successful when you start to think sociologically in terms of how networks of influence and power work. So that's just an example to show you that classification, which social science is about, is not bad. We can do it poorly, but the question is, how do we do it well? And so a lot of this course will be about how do we think about culture well? How do we do it well? And in fact, one of our weeks or two of our weeks will be about classification as a cultural activity, as one way to understand culture. All right, so let me wrap it up here. Spillman, in her introductory article there, suggested that there's some dominant ways that sociologists study culture. Well, I don't totally agree with her, but she laid out that book of readings, which is an incredible book of readings. I'm sorry it's a little pricey, but it's really the best way to kind of hit a lot of different topics. She categorized it a couple of different ways to say, these are the main schools of thought about society and culture in sociology today. I don't totally agree with her, so I'm going to kind of move us around in kind of a different pattern through that book. And I've organized the syllabus according to the ways that I kind of like to think about culture. We're going to pretty soon be talking about this idea of values. I mentioned that with Talcott Parsons. Values was ditched by sociologists for a long time, but they're back. So we're going to talk about what would it mean to think about culture through this concept of values. Then we're going to spend some time talking with kind of critical approaches to culture, looking at the production of culture, how things such as rock and roll music are produced, and the institutions that are behind producing culture. And are there things that they're trying to embed, or messages that they're trying to embed into those cultural objects that they produce? We're going to spend some great time with Emil Durkheim, who's really going to help us to see, maybe blow some of our minds about how society classifies people and behaviors in ways that are subconscious but have huge influences on how you and I move through the social world. And then in a lot of ways we're going to spend a lot of the second half of the course with Pierre Bourdieu, one of the great sociologists of the end of the 20th century who has some very interesting ways of thinking about culture. And we're going to read this book about elite prep schools that is a really good book and will help us to see how culture can recreate inequality, how it morphs, and how cultural stuff like books and movies and music can actually be deployed by people to try and get ahead in the world. And so we'll get this really interesting sense of how culture can be a tool that people use to do things with their lives. So kind of laid this course out to really hit a number of different interesting ideas. I hope you enjoy this course. As we go, in your discussions, be precise, be comprehensive. If you use quotations in your readings, make sure to cite them and make sure to give credit where credit is due to other people. Be honest with yourself as you read. If you don't understand stuff and you've gone over it a couple of times, bring that up as your question in the discussion group. I'll try to answer a number of questions that come up in the discussions every week so that I can clarify those for you. And make sure to always be in touch with me sooner than later when things happen that are preventing you from succeeding, whether it's course material or something outside of the course. And let me give you an example how things outside of the course can affect your life. You may have noticed, have this big old bandage on my finger. Well, 2 weeks ago, I did battle with what was an overly stale ciabatta bun as I was making my lunch. And voila, ended up with 7 stitches later that day, and they'll be coming out this week. That had a huge effect on what I was able to do because you may have noticed, but you type with all your fingers, not just 9 of your fingers. And on top of it, for 2 days, I had a heck of a lot of pain that slowed me down. If I was a student taking this course, I might have found myself on Thursday going, oh crap, I can't get that online discussion post due. But what I should have thought about was 2 days earlier when I first had the injury and say, I should contact Professor Adler and talk to him about this. See if there might be a way we can work out the assignment for this week, get a little extension on the deadline. Don't contact him last minute, but think about it ahead of time when it's a real thing that can impact how I'm doing in the course. Because I'd rather you guys succeed in this course. I didn't say I'd rather you get A's. If you get A's, that's great. I'd rather you succeed, do well, learn from the work, learn something about yourself. So speak up sooner than later. This week's readings, really quick, are last from kind of the anthropological world. They're not the view of anthropology that we've talked about in the Spillman reading in here. Instead, they're 2 different, very different ways to think about culture that emerged in the 20th century. Ruth Benedict, see if you can determine the strengths of her approach. She does a lot of comparison where she talks about the ways different societies seem to treat the exact same thing, such as childhood or marriage. And she'll tell all these different ways that these 2 social institutions vary. And then see if you can pull out from her why this might be a good way to study culture. And then Clifford Geertz, he does this thing called thick description where he drills down. He spent years looking at one village in Morocco to try and understand the culture of that village. He wasn't comparing it against others. He was trying to understand these very minute differences in meaning and how the symbolic meaning of actions could be played with. So he might look at this lecture that I did and say, is that guy in there, is that a real injury? And if so, is he trying to signal that we provide him sympathy, or is he playing with us? Is that just a bandage that he popped on there in order that we might pay more attention, that we might watch the lecture longer till the end in hopes that he might unveil what actually happened to that finger? Or is it something else? Does he just like to wear a bandage on his finger? Who knows? Well, Geertz said you could know if you drilled down deep enough and you did thick description and got into the deep, thick meanings of a society. That's a very different method than Ruth Benedict's method. But those 2 methods will, in your discussion, give you some space to understand that there's different ways to approach this study of culture. Not only different ways to think about culture, but different ways to study or to approach the study of it. And so that's our content for the discussion this week. And then next week, we'll be off on to new things. Have a great week, and I'll look forward to seeing you again. Be in touch sooner than later if you've got problems.